Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. So today, we're going to dig into Rob Larson's Capitalism versus Freedom. It's a book that really makes you stop and think about a belief many of us hold. Is our economic system the true engine of liberty, or could it maybe be a kind of hidden cage? Larson kicks things off with this really provocative question. What if the free market isn't as free as we've been led to believe? What if the biggest threats to our personal freedom aren't the obvious ones, but are actually baked into the very structure of our economy? For a long time, the story we've been told is that freedom is all about fighting against government overreach. But Larson comes along and says, hang on, that's a super narrow way to look at it. By focusing only on the power of the state, we completely miss another massive force that shapes our lives, the unchecked power of private corporations. So what is this conventional idea of freedom that Larson is pushing back against? Let's take a quick look at the idea that has really shaped our thinking for generations. You've got these really influential thinkers, right? Like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek. And they argued that the number one threat to your freedom is always the government. Their whole argument was that the state is the big bad wolf, the only entity that really has the power to force you to do things you don't want to do. This all boils down to this concept called negative freedom. Basically, it's freedom from, specifically freedom from the government getting in your business. The idea is pretty simple. The less the government interferes with taxes and regulations, the more individual liberty we all have. And in this worldview, the free market is the ultimate expression of freedom. But here's where Larson really challenges things. He asks a pretty simple question. Is the government really the only source of power that can mess with your freedom? What if we've been looking for threats in all the wrong places? And this, right here, is the absolute core of the book's argument. Because when we're so hyper-focused on government as the only bad guy, we develop this huge blind spot. We end up letting a totally different kind of power, private, corporate power, grow and grow totally unchecked, shaping our lives with zero accountability to us. And this isn't just some random thing. Larson points out that this corporate power shows up in these predictable patterns that slowly and often invisibly chip away at our freedom. Let's break down what those patterns are. First up, you've got concentration. You see, free markets have this tendency. They don't stay a collection of small businesses for very long. They naturally start to be dominated by a few huge players. Just think about eyeglasses for a second. One company, Luxottica, pretty much controls the entire industry, from the designer brands to the stores you buy them in. So when a handful of giants call all the shots, what does that really do to your freedom of choice? And that concentration leads right into the next pattern, dependency. Think about it. Most of us aren't capital owners. We have to work for a living. We have to sell our time and our skills just to get by. And this creates a huge imbalance of power. And this isn't some radical new idea. Even the father of capitalism, Adam Smith, pointed out that when push comes to shove, the owners always have the upper hand over the workers. Okay, next up is a pattern called externalization. It sounds a bit academic, but the idea is actually super simple. It's about companies dumping their costs onto everybody else. When a factory pollutes a river, that's not just some unfortunate side effect of doing business. It's basically forcing us to pay the price. It's limiting our freedom to have clean air and clean water. And finally, and this is a huge one, there's capture. Because all that money and power, it doesn't just stay in the economic world. Nope, it spills right over into politics. Through things like lobbying and massive campaign donations, big corporations can essentially write their own rules, and they basically use the government as a tool to protect their own bottom line. And this isn't just theoretical. Frederick Douglass, a man who understood the meaning of freedom better than almost anyone, he saw this power dynamic so clearly. He talked about a slavery of wages, a kind of economic coercion that he said could be almost as crushing as any law passed by a government. So with all these patterns, how do we get our heads around this? Well, Larson gives us this brilliant metaphor to tie it all together, and he calls it the toll road to serfdom. I want you to imagine you're on a highway. You're told you're totally free to drive anywhere you want. Sounds great, right? But here's the catch. Every single exit ramp, the one to a good job, the one to affordable housing, the one to a decent education, has a private toll booth. And those tolls aren't set by a government you can vote out, they're set by a private company. So, yeah, you're technically free to drive on the main road, but your actual ability to get where you need to go is controlled by someone else. That's the toll road to serfdom. Okay, so why does looking at the world this way matter so much? What does this reframing actually do for us? This slide really lays it out perfectly. The old way of thinking told us freedom means less government, period. Power lives in the state. But Larson's reframing says, hold on, real freedom means a lack of coercion from any source, whether it's public or private. It recognizes that immense power also lives in concentrated capital. And that's the bottom line. If we genuinely care about being free, we have to recognize that power can come in a business suit just as easily as it can from a government office. True freedom requires holding all concentrated power accountable, not just the kind we're used to looking for. So it leaves us with a pretty heavy question to think about. If our path to freedom is lined with all these private toll booths, who's sitting in there collecting the money? And maybe more importantly, who gets to decide how much our freedom costs? For the full, long-form deep dive into this book and its ideas, follow the link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.